Okay, we are recording. We are
live.
Ding! What's the date? 14th of May.
It is, I think, yeah.
And we're here setting up our mics, just setting up for the first time in our new home.
Yeah. It's funny to be doing it on sofas. We've spent all this time sort of focused on, tables and chairs.
Yeah.
And here we are actually sat on sofas.
Sofas and lounges.
Which is much more our style,
chairs.
To be honest.
I'm going to slurp now. So.
You were talking about writing as a spiritual practice.
Oh, yeah, that's a nice idea. So, yeah. It just came as the idea, really, because it's been such a rich thing for me these last few years. Been just turning up at the page. And I know that I can't speak for anyone else's, any writer or any other writer's process, although, I have looked quite a lot at descriptions that writers have used for how they come to writing. What I always found was that how close it is to something like meditation. How if, for me, it's the writing is as much abidance in the silence of the heart as it is about the words coming. And in fact, it's about establishing that silence of the heart, that silent awareness, and then waiting receptively, and then words come and then you capture them, like fishing or something. Well,
I always liked your phrase when you talk about emanations.
Emanations from an empty mind.
Yeah. Like I felt like that was a really beautiful way of captivating the feeling of it.
Yeah.
The felt sort of lived, embodied, somatic feeling of being present and attentive to that muse, those words rising from within.
Yeah.
And
so how do you? And I've thought and written about and read about relating to the muse and what does that look like and what does that feel like, and so I've often used phrases like making a bed for the muse, or preparing the room, or what are the conditions in which the muse is more likely to show up. And receptivity is the number one. Non-expectation, or certainly not striving, any amount of striving or searching or looking for something to think about or write
or
about,
outcomes of that as well.
Anything like that is going to scare her off. And you basically got to, like, as I say, prepare the ground and then trust. And the fact that you've set up a context, of turning up.
But that's very much like a spiritual practice, actually.
It's very much like a spiritual practice.
I see sometimes meditators who I would say maybe got slightly the wrong end of the stick around meditation, and they're looking for very particular outcomes. They're looking for very particular experiences instead of the very act of what meditation is, which is a deep settling into oneself and being and listening and being open to being with what is arising.
Yeah. So I think, I can't speak to the creative process for anyone other than myself, really, though I'm very, perennially interested in the processes of artists and writers, and there's a few I really have an affinity with, and there are plenty of spiritual traditions in the world that use art and etc. as as a practice, as a spiritual practice. I mean, you look to Zen for one. Zen is very much, in a lot of its forms, very action focused, and that attracted me really early on into spirituality. These Zen, the art of archery, or Zen, the art of calligraphy, Zen, the art of whatever it is.
Islamic art as well.
Islamic art as well. But and certainly when we studied ceramics and some of this, the Oriental master potters, a lot of them were very much interested in the state of consciousness of the potter, of the artist. That was the primary concern. I remember this one quote. I can't remember who, it was some great, I think it was a Japanese potter, and who said something like, I'm interested in what remains after all the pots are broken. Right. So what does that point to? That points to the state of consciousness of the potter. And it very much that, the Wu Wei, the doing without doing, and just the no mind aspect of creativity, just simply acting without mind.
And emptying out of the personal, I've succeeded or failed at this artwork. This is me doing this, rather than the emptying out of oneself. And instead the creative process fills the spirit and acts through the body instead. And it's non-personal. It's almost like an act of surrender, and therefore making, I know it's strange phrasing, but making love with the act of creativity in that moment.
I call it dancing with the muse,
Yeah, and that becomes the entirety of it. The process is the fulfillment of everything in that moment, rather than anything to do with the outcome or who's created this and who's done this good or who's done. It's not about that.
No, it's about a firm embrace to the moment. And so, for me, it's been empty mind has been the foundation of it. And because before several years ago, when I sort of shifted my mind, my awareness sort of shifted into a different sort of bigger space, let's say. I was always interested in, the creative process but writing was always tough, and it's probably because my mind was busy,
too involved,
couldn't find the right approach to how to access the creative flow, because that's, to me, again, that's another associated concept and state, let's say, is flow.
It's like an underground river that's always flowing, and we have to sort of be able to tap into that or dig down into it somehow.
Exactly. So what's that about? How do you access that creative flow? So, the creation, whatever that might be, whatever your medium might be, becomes this, a joyful, spiritual flow, an action that's without self-reflection, without conception, without self-awareness, self-consciousness. So I liked certain art. So the traditions like Zen have this very strongly in them, but also certain artists do as well. One particularly comes to mind is Agnes Martyn. I mean, she's a visual artist, a painter, but she was Zen, wasn't she? She had some Zen training. I think she was.
Can't remember.
I think she certainly had Buddhist teaching. So she was as a visual artist, and she would talk about just sitting. She'd go into the studio and she'd have her blank canvas sitting there, and she'd just sit and wait until she's moved to make a mark. Or some impression will come, and then she'll make that mark, and then she'll unpack that. And if that then, if and I've adapted, from lots of different artists, my own rules, my own guidelines, my own process about my creative process, particularly in terms of writing. And that first is sitting. You turn up at the at the canvas, at the page, and you sit quietly and you wait. You have nothing else going on, so you're not engaged in any inputs, and you haven't got, you're not scrolling your phone waiting for the inspiration to come. So you sit.
Well, you got to be open to listening for when the inspiration comes, and if you're distracted, I mean, you can't, you won't hear it, you won't see it, you won't feel it.
Exactly. So you have to sort of establish and and settle into an open, non-engaged state of awareness, state of mind awareness. Just
open awareness.
And settle into that and wait. And what I found, and so that's making the bed for the muse, non-engaged, open, patient, just truly patient. I can be here forever.
Yeah.
And you're not looking for anything. You're just waiting,
because
it's the muse who visits you. Yeah. And I can call it the muse, but it's another word I use is inspiration. The inspiration will come. So sit and wait in an unengaged, open, patient fashion, and then inevitably and almost invariably, although I wouldn't say completely invariably, almost invariably, inspiration will come, the thought will come, the stream of consciousness of thinking or impressions will start to arise, and then you ride that wave. It's like surfing, you're sitting on the sea and the waves are coming, and then you'll catch a wave and there it is, and then you'll
without judgment or analysis.
Without judgment, exactly. There's no inline editing here. You just write whatever is given.
Well, you become the scribe. You've often spoken about that, and I have too, of like becoming the scribe of life. It's not, again, I come back to the phrase, it's not personal. You become the scribe there. You become open of ideas of your own, and in that you're filled up with the ideas of, for want of a better word, God.
Well, because when you hang out at this level of open, empty, patient, waiting mind, when a thought does come, it's very obvious that, well, where's this coming from? Where's the me in this? Yeah. I mean, to be fair, and this is why it gets so spiritual, because that is really the great non-dual insight. Who thinks thoughts? Who is there at the center of your being? So you're resting in your own empty, expansive, awareness. And there you are, but there's no one there. It's just formless, open intelligence and awakeness. And then thoughts come, sensations come. All sorts of things arise within that space that you are. So you can take it all the way to the true non-dual, where it's beyond personal identity, as you're pointing to. Well, whose thoughts are these then if they're not mine, and who am I anyway? But then you use that place and that insight to go, okay, well, I'm gonna capture what arises here. If thoughts arise, if thinking starts to come from this quietness, from this deep, subtle quietness, and then thoughts start to come. Because of the quietness, they're often very distinct. And it took me a while to learn, if you've got a loud mind, forget about it. It's very hard to pick what thread, what thought,
what's relevant.
So thick and fast, what's relevant, what's pertinent, what wants to be, what wants to be transcribed, what wants to be heard. For me, anyway. But it became, as my mind, as my awareness got quieter, especially when you then go actively into and settle into this state. When a thought does arise, you see it, you hear it, you feel it, you sense it, and it's easy, and its dimensions and its content are very clear, and you can just capture that, and then like there'll be a flurry of it. I call that the inspiration. The inspirations come. There it is. Those thoughts, and I capture them. I'm typing, I'm writing, whatever it is, and those thoughts come, and then once that wave is spent, that wave might be a flurry. It'll just drop off back into that silence. You just fall back into that receptive place again until the next wave. You don't go, oh, where do I go from here, and start analyzing, start thinking, No, don't get me wrong. That's one way of approaching writing. That's not mine. I don't think at all. You know what I mean? I don't actively engage, analyze, think about what shall I say. I'm just waiting and I'm listening, and then I'm transcribing what comes.
And there's a certain amount of wholeness in what comes, even if it comes out. Obviously, we live in a time-space dimension where there's a linear sort of aspect in terms of writing or whatever it is. But the seed of the wholeness is there. It's like it sort of comes up from the mist of emptiness below.
Yeah.
It sort of comes up in a wholeness sort of manner. And once it's complete, as in it's been expressed in its wholeness, at least sufficiently, then everything goes back into silence. It's like the gap in between the content of life is really honored and known in that process. Yeah.
No, and that's why it's so integrating. It so integrates the personal, let's say, the mind, the activity of the mind, to the deep open awareness that the more essential nature, our more essential natures. And I find so that's why the spiritual practice thing comes, because it's deep listening, and then it's responding. It's natural flowing response to it.
Response without judgment, and that's what's important, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Because our judging mind gets in on a lot of life and actually distorts the message of what's in the innocence of the message of what is being expressed in life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so it's free writing. You don't edit on the hoof. You don't judge it while it's there. I mean, later you can look back at it. You
Absolutely.
do. You look back at it. Maybe you'll go, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what the fact. In some way, so what are some of the aspects of the practice itself? It's practicing non-striving, non-seeking, patient waiting, allowing, natural flowing responding,
deep listening,
and acting with what's being given at that moment, and when that energy's gone, coming back to repose
and trusting that, like
and
trusting the silence where it's there, and the activity where it is there as well. Like trusting both those aspects of life, the silence and the dynamism there. Yeah,
that dance, and so it's about for me, it's about creating the conditions, and those conditions are, actually really quite profound, because they're so akin to that you're basically. Let's say, utilizing the very nature of the consciousness is functioning to create artifacts that we call art. So, and I think I've read enough, artists talk about, I don't even do this. This is just, this is happening, or some force beyond myself, and some are more aware of it than others. Ideation and whatever creative output there is just emerges out of nothing.
Well, it's directly a parallel to the spiritual search, which is that recognition of I'm not doing any of this anyway, and so actually this is a really beautiful, direct parallel of what that is to see that I'm not creating all of this. This is all happening, and
you see it. It's that this thought came from nowhere. I'm capturing that. Mm-hmm. This idea came from nowhere. I'm capturing that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying that's the only way artists work. Some artists work in all sorts of different ways. But the creativity, personal or universal, is just this great miracle, that emerges from a primordial,
and And as a
no
spiritual
thingness.
and as a spiritual practice, that's what you're coming to see through writing or through creating art.
Yes, you're witness to it.
Yeah, you're coming
very
to see
literally. You are
clarity.
the consciousness witness to that. Yeah,
that the clarity of that recognition.
Yeah, and so you pick that up. So that's kind of interesting too. It's been a really fruitful part of my daily life.
You've been practicing that, if you want to use those terms, for quite a while now, and seeing the fruit of that and seeing how necessary and how important that is in your life, and why you feel drawn to orientate around that, actually.
Yeah. I mean, today we were talking, weren't we, about the sort of psychological therapeutic aspect of that. Because, and I wrote about this early on. Well, so brief potted sort of history. Before 2015, I was, very much involved in, art making. And my two great loves, consciousness and art, and, well, you. 3.
Shucks.
Yeah. So I couldn't help. Those were cross-pollinating each other for a long time. And it's funny when I write about, my spiritual path, I don't often include the creative aspect of that and how that was such an integral part of my life. The parallels, as I said, between the creative process and like the process of self-inquiry or meditation, they're very clear. But for a long time, my mind was just too busy, and I hadn't given it enough to develop it in the way that was satisfactory to me. And it was only later, when my awareness became clearer, when I settled more into my own being, that it came online much more clearly. And it wasn't me trying to write about something. Mm-hmm. It was like, words, concepts, ideas, things that turned into things I would post as tweets and articles and blog posts, and so that was one aspect of it, just sort of generating interesting, like yourself. I think it came online for you too,
massively.
Right, just sort of starting to pop. You took a lid off, and then the words started flowing out, and
a tap that got turned on.
Right, exactly. And I think it was on the basis of that empty mind.
Absolutely. Well, because in some ways what happens is because there's not the sort of personal egoic judgment, that sort of empties out. You then, it's because it's then not personal, you then become available to trusting what is coming out, what is emanating.
Yeah.
And I think for me anyway, what I noticed when I first started writing was there was this sense of curiosity around, and I still have it to this day, but I don't do so much writing now. I spend most of my activity talking with people. Right. But it's the same feeling that is present from almost the first day I started writing, which is I'm curious as to what I'm going to say next.
Right.
Like this genuine sort of curiosity of what will come.
Right.
And there's sort of a joy in that then. There's a genuine sort of curiosity and love and joy of, well, let's see what happens next. Let's see what this apparent Imogen has to say for herself, and it's really, I still, to this day, it still fascinates me.
Yeah.
When there's no false ownership of it.
Right. You
become curious and open and fascinated as to what life wants to express through you. Yes.
Yeah.
But what does life want to have expressed into the world in this moment?
Yeah.
And then it becomes this, it's very humbling. It's a very sort of a humble sense of, I'm really curious. I'm genuinely curious.
Because you don't know.
No, because you don't.
There's no
forethought.
next.
There's no forethought in
No.
speech or writing. You know, for me, it's more speech now, but it was writing. But it's the same thing. There's no forethought. It's not like, oh, I'm planning what I'm going to say, or I'm planning what I'm going to write. It's just, I am a witness, or I am the audience of that as it is emanating out from me, through me, to me as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating thing, really. I mean, we become. I think that that's the big shift. Is for me was in some sense how can I say this? The sublimation of intention, in that. If you're too heavy-handed with intention, it's just you're just pulling teeth, trying to create, and creation is just when you look closely at it, it comes from nothing. It doesn't come from the personal self, although it might have. It comes through the lens of the personal self, right? Yeah,
totally. It has the flavor of that.
Yeah, exactly. So your writing is.
Imogen flavored.
Exactly, because it's run through that. It's delivered in.
But it's a wellspring from within.
Yeah, and you see it coming.
Wellspring is not. I've caused that wellspring.
Yes.
It's really about tuning into the natural emanating wellspring that already is.
Yeah. So it's learning to listen for me, in the most profound way, listening in that deep, open silence, quietness of awareness of mind, and then in that recognizing patiently, and then the contrast then of something's arise. Here it is. Here's this street, and I'd say, as you say, no censoring, no editing, just faithfully transcribing what wants to get. Nice. Articulated.
Yeah, there's an unconditionality about it as well.
I mean,
then.
You can come back. Sorry, what
there's
was
an unconditionality about it.
Totally. There's no, and of course, I had to learn what that felt like when I was getting in my way. Not that, drop that. So you're feeling in yourself. Oh, if you start thinking and reflecting on what you've written as you're writing it, and then analyzing it, and then no, not that.
Yeah.
You're just abiding in silence until the thoughts come, and then you transcribe them. Now later on, you'll edit and revise if you want to. But so looking back at other creative / spiritual influences that really helped me hone into my own process in this regard was who was the poet?
Rilke.
No. Oh, that's another beautiful one, but that's a recent one. No, Ginsberg, Allen Ginsberg.
Yes, first thought, best thought.
First thought, best thought. I read all about these writers who are like, you have to do and strive. And what did Hemingway say? Writing's easy. You just got to sit by a typewriter and bleed. And okay, he was a bullfighter and a soldier.
But I can kind of see where that might come from in terms of you just let it all out, and there's the emptying out. Open up and let it all out. It's like there's this. I mean, he paints it in his typically colourful way, let's say, but it is pointing to just that pouring out.
Right.
That sense of pouring out.
Yeah, I like that. I hadn't thought about that before. Yeah. So, what
you were talking about Ginsberg first thought.
But Ginsberg, but I really appreciate Allen Ginsberg because, in terms of his writing, he had this way about him, his writing, and so Ginsberg, as for those who don't know, great American beat poet, one of the exemplars of that era of writing. but he was a Buddhist as well. He was profoundly Buddhist. He set up Naropa College with, I think, Chogyam Trungpa back in the 70s, I venture, maybe 60s, but 70s. But he was very much involved in the creative process of writing, and also in the spiritual practices of meditation and, understanding the nature of being itself. So that beautiful combination was right up my street. And one of his great maxims is or approaches was first thought, best thought. That you come to trust what first emerges from if you're quiet enough and if you're in yourself sufficiently, you trust whether you want to call it your unconscious, your subconscious, whether it's just awareness itself, the muse, whatever. You trust what arises, and if you're sufficiently listening and sufficiently responsive, and you're out of the way, you as a judging person are just not participating in this process. You're a receptive / active. You're a receptive listener and an active transcriber. That's it. And so learning to hear those first thoughts, and they are the best thoughts.
It takes a lot of courage to do that, I think.
It does. I don't like to edit. I'm lazy. I don't want to edit. I don't want to go back. The juice, the feeling, the joy, the bliss is actually sitting in this receptive, open, blissful consciousness and just waiting and capturing these little waves of thoughts and ideas and
pure creative intelligence.
Just intelligence, just offering itself up, and I'm just there to capture it. Then I'll drop back into my, wait to catch the next wave.
Beautiful.
So it's a lot like surfing,
Yeah, it reminds me. I can't remember. I'm terrible at remembering who. So I'm leaning on you here. I'm relying on you. You said it reminds me of. I think it was a Buddhist teacher who said. If you're going to teach, just teach.
Sung San.
But it's
Master
that principle of if you're going to write, just write.
Yeah.
If you're going to create, just create.
Yeah.
If you're going to speak, just speak. Don't be concerned with the outcome of that or how that is going to come across or what that's going to produce or whether it's good or bad or indifferent or any of those things. Just the innocence of pouring out.
Yeah.
What is coming and allowing yourself to be that vessel, to be that empty vessel that holds the tender space for that outpouring to happen in whatever mode that might be, whether it's speaking, whether it's writing, it doesn't matter, but just to allow yourself to be that vessel in that moment is a really... I think it requires one to completely surrender their own self in terms of the small self. It requires you to completely surrender your ideas of what's going to come out, of what the outcome of that is, of what the quality of that is. All of these things, again, we're talking about judgments and analysis here. You have to surrender all of that. You have to lay those swords down, those tools down, which are wonderful tools, but... only appropriate where they're needed. If they are in play all the time, it's like censoring before life is fully expressed.
Yes, quite. First thought, best thought, and that's it. It is humbling, and it is. You're right. It's surrendering, and it's acknowledging that it's not from me.
No. It's for me though.
It's the gift.
Yeah.
It's the gift.
Me.
The muse brings the gift.
Yeah.
And do you receive it, or do you go, "Hey, what's in the bar? Let's just show what's
I want the yellow one, not the blue one.
I don't want that one. Don't bring me that." And actually, that's part of the process for me. As I'm writing, sometimes you can feel when the personal is starting to go, "Oh, is this all you got?" I don't want to be talking about this, and it's like, who the fuck are you to tell the muse what the hubris of it exactly? So you got to fall back into humility. So again, it's ego training as well.
Or my struggle, which is slightly different but of the same caliber.
Yeah.
not now. You know, that thing of like often middle of the night, or often I get it when I'm having doing a transmission. I'm like, not now, not now.
I can't I can't open a computer or pick up a notepad and write this down right now. You're driving, and it's like, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been someone like Mary Oliver, who's a great American poet, and she writes. I think might have been her or some of her ilk who was talking about, again, this receptivity and that the creative, the art, the poem comes to the individual. It's not like something they create themselves on a personal level. It comes, and she talked about how she was in a field down from her house, and she could hear a poem coming rolling over the hills far away, and she had to write and run back because she was just in the middle of a bottom of a big garden or something. She'd run back home just so that she could capture the poem as it came through, and then she'd have her notepad and she'd capture the poem, because if she didn't, it would carry on rolling over the hills and someone else would capture it.
I can totally relate to that. So many incidents of that in my life.
And it's gone.
It is.
You've got to be there to capture it.
I think there's so many things that, like, over the years that so many incidents where that's happened.
Right.
And I've come to be very trusting then of like, oh, well, if it's not, and it even happens now, I lose my train of thought, for instance. It's not really train of thought. I lose my train. And now I've come to this trust of, well, it wasn't meant for this moment then.
Right.
But still.
That's rationalizing it.
No, but it's the reality of that. It's not just rationalizing. It's literally the reality of that.
I'm only teasing.
Yeah, but it so many incidents of that in my life in recent years where I can feel the wholeness of the seed of some thought or some contemplation bubbling up,
some inspiration,
and just really not being in the space where I can capture it down at all.
No.
And now I have ways in which I've sort of got around that.
Yeah, on your phone. Like I'm always turning to my phone.
Yeah, or voice notes,
capture
or
voice
things
notes
like that. But still, there's so many, and I still have the taste of them in my system somehow. The ones that were missed.
Yeah.
And it's like they'll come again. They come round again. Maybe not in the same way.
Yeah.
But it's like I really do believe this. I feel it. It's not a belief. It's like if something needs to be expressed, nothing can stop it.
Yes.
But it might take a while to get there.
yeah, it might take coming back around. Hey, wasn't that the one that got away back in 2014 or something? Yeah.
It's
so that's nice. So that's part of it as well. So there's all these inspirations and so art and the creative process is so analogous to the spiritual practice.
Yeah.
So that's my main focus right now. Actually, is sort of sitting and I do and writing as it comes, and I like, I'm not that. I call it art, but that's just the word we give to creative process and the creative artifacts, whatever that looks like, whether it's written, however good, bad, or indifferent it is.
You are bearing witness to creation happening.
Yeah, exactly. And so you participate in that, by establishing the conditions and giving yourself over to that.
Yeah, because that's what life is calling of you. That's what life has called you forth to be in this moment, is to be that the vessel by which that is expressed in this life.
Yeah. But so aside from the I call it the creative process because it is, or the generative process almost, you could say. But it's not all. We were talking this morning about the nature of writing for me is often more, right now particularly, seems to be much more, less about the art and more about the self-reflection.
The process.
And the process. And it's like it helps to articulate some deep processes that are that continue to occur.
You're exploring on a really subtle, fundamental maybe level.
Yeah.
Some of the, I think, the root causes, let's say, at the moment, the root causes of
mechanics. Let's say, yeah,
that's a better word. Yeah, like that root mechanics of often in life we live it on a very surface level.
Mm-hmm.
And actually what this is calling to you to is an exploration on a deeper level of those mechanics, of those personal mechanics, those sort of what's arising within you.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting that, it can be, I don't know, I just find, I call it, and I'm not the first one to call it this one, turning up at the page, I think, again, I can't remember whether it was someone like, whoever,
wasn't it the
Stephen Pressfield?
Yeah,
is a great exponent of the creative process and an articulator of the creative process. I mean, tremendous, and really, his book War of Art is one of the best sort of.
There's also The Artist's Way has been an influence for you.
The Artist's Way has been an influence.
Earlier, particularly.
An earlier incarnate, another one. But, this was it. I was always involved in the creative process and I'm not just interested in art as an artifact, but what's the process? What's left when all the pots are broken, right? What's left when all the artwork's been, burned? What's left when all the words have been erased? That's the point.
Yeah.
So I can't remember what I was going to say about him now.
Turning up at the page. You were
turning up
about.
At the page, exactly. Yeah, turning up at the page. That I've got my rules. My guides. Rule number 1: turn up at the page.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you want to create, if you want to participate in that, then you have to show up for it. First thing, go pro, as Pressfield would say. Every day, turn up. Open up your notebook or your laptop, or put your canvas there, or clay, whatever it is, but you have to turn up, and you don't know what's going to come. You don't know if anything's going to come, but you're doing your part, and you're communicating that to the muse and saying, I'm here, I'm just going to wait here, okay, I've done my part.
Nice. And
should you show up, I'll do my part in that, and I'll transcribe or shape or paint or create music or whatever. I'm tuned in here, I'm ready,
I'm open. I'm open and willing and able.
And so that shifted for me a few years ago, because what was happening was I started to notice that from time to time, these fully formed words, sentences, paragraphs, pieces would just start to emerge, and I'd capture them. But they were just coming willy-nilly, and it's it's like the poem coming across the hilltops. Sometimes you caught it, sometimes you didn't, but it wasn't like I was planning for it, and it wasn't like I had created any real space for it, and I would just respond to it if I could at the time, and write it down, and it comes with an energy, doesn't it? The inspiration comes like a wave of inspiration. It has a quality to it that you can kind of capture and participate in. But more and more, I realized, the decision for me came back in 2020, where I said, there's a lot of this stuff coming, and
you started to take it seriously.
I thought, well, what happened if I went pro? This is a Stephen Pressfield idea. He calls going pro. It's like you don't do it when you just feel like it. You turn up every day.
Yeah.
And,
treat it like your job.
You treat it like a job.
Yeah.
This is what you do. And it doesn't matter if nothing comes or a ton comes or something, or if it's banal or profound. It doesn't actually matter, but you're turning up for it every day. And I thought, what would happen if I did that? What would... And so all these different dimensions of what the page for me was, what that empty page as an analogy or as a manifestation of the empty space of awareness itself. What happens there? What can happen there? Well, of course, everything does, and everything can.
It'd be like akin to taking a spiritual practice seriously.
It's exactly that. Yeah,
it's like, right, I'm committing to doing this.
Yes.
I can see the benefits of doing this.
Yeah.
And I'm doing it.
And it's a tremendous, thing of the different dimensions of it, because sometimes I'll write and there'll be some spiritual insight or some something like that, or some articulation of spiritual principles, or sometimes it's just idle blah, like Julia Cameron's morning pages, just whatever's on your mind, just write it out, and that's fine too. But sometimes you can really so we're layered. We're as beings.
Yeah, we exist on many levels and layers.
Emotional, psychological, physiological, spiritual. Yeah. All these different dimensions, and awareness that we are, and that all these levels are made out of too. Mm-hmm. But all these levels show up on that, and where your attention falls, then in a sense that level can start to speak for itself.
So true. And actually sometimes you can't get to the more subtler levels before the more obvious, let's say gross, not as in yucky, but gross as in more manifest levels are expressed. That sometimes it takes some expression on the grosser levels to be able to get to transcend into the finer realms that are much quieter and softer and subtler in their expression. Yeah. And so sometimes you do have to have those yucky morning pages of mundanity sort of be expressed in order so that we are then it's almost like a flower that is blossoming or opening. You got the outer petals, the rougher outer petals first, before the very tender inner petals can sort of have breathing room, let's say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, it's so there's this, for me right now, interestingly, there's a sort of a psychological self-reflection going on. Mm. And it's because by thinking straight onto the page like that, just for its own sake, you're kind of giving form to often what is formless and unstructured, or out of sight, in shadow.
Yeah, you're bringing clarity. You're literally what is clarity? Light. You're bringing light to that which is unseen or unclear.
Yeah. I'm really, so as I was going to say, like back in 2020, I kind of went, right, I'm going to do this. And I basically just every day sat down. And that became my foundational,
Focus. Practice.
Yeah, practice. I kind of think of it as contemplative writing, something like that.
Yeah, totally.
And, it's an endless, like consciousness itself is just an endless journey of discovery, and you just don't know what you're going to get, and it's like sometimes it's like a torrent of profundity to me anyway, but sometimes it's a quiet reflection and revelation of personal dynamics, psychological dynamics, stuff like that, and sometimes it's just a reflection on the Monday, but it's just I guess one of the reasons I brought this up, not just because it's going on in my mind, and we've talked about I've always been interested in the creative process, so that speaks to the process of the creation or generation of writing, art, whatever. It's not always that, as I said. Sometimes it's something else. Sometimes it's just self-reflection and, even therapeutic kind of thinking. But just seeing it clearly as a spiritual practice, and because in the work that we do with others, I almost feel like saying, to some people who are very caught up in their mind, who are very unclear and confused, and perhaps anxiety shows up, and that just write a little bit. Just sit down and just write whatever comes to mind, and start to articulate those confusions that exist, and it might start to unravel a little bit, bring clarity to something that wasn't there. Because in this sort of spiritual teaching, it's often we're trying, I am anyway, like I suspect to you, although we have definitely have different, different a variety of approaches, but my big practice was, look for the no mind, find that empty awareness in which all these things come and arise and come to be. Establish, your identity beyond the personal. Find your deep essence, your true nature, which is silent, blissful self. And that's the big stroke. That's the liberating approach and insight. One of them, anyway. But sometimes, in order, as you say, sometimes in order to bring clarity, you need to articulate.
You've got to traverse.
You need to traverse these things.
The layers of what is occluding that clarity.
Yeah. So bring clarity to the occlusions themselves.
Yeah. You have to start where you are. It's funny that phrase came up a couple of times in the last 2 days. Start where you are.
Yeah.
Don't try and get to somewhere where you're not. Start where you are and move through that, into that, meet that.
Yeah.
Start there. And that reminds me of, you're talking about, like, sometimes you sit to write and there's just mundane stuff coming out. And it's like, we could quite easily judge that or throw that away as less than. But actually, to just let yourself deeply meet and surrender to, and not judge anything of where you find yourself to be, because it's that perpetuates the false notion of not this, that sense of but not this.
You want to bypass it, don't you?
Yeah,
you
not this, not this, not this, and it's like, no, that too. Start there.
Which is what you're all about, which is touching on this sort of, this too.
This too, include this too. And so it's start where you are. Don't look for perfection of you've got to, and I'm thinking of it in terms of the writing process now. It's like getting everything, I need to only come up with profound things. It's like, no, start where you are.
Yeah.
Start where you are. See that is just as sacred as the most profound utterings. See that the mundanity, yeah. that is made of the divine too, and that is just as important and just as much needs to be expressed as anything else. And there's the humility, is to let go of our ideas of value around what is creatively being expressed.
I just got this sense of the flow of it, that what comes, let it come, and let it in.
Yeah.
But then don't hold on to it. Let it go when it wants to go. And because life is flow.
Let what comes come. Let what goes go. I say that quite frequently in my retreats. At the start of retreats, I like
so don't create a blockage by either wanting
holding on to things that you want to keep or pushing away things you don't want to keep, and instead let your, and I use this visual analogy because I think it's something everyone can relate to, of the clenched fist versus the open palm. And it's like everyone knows what it is to keep the tension of the clenched fist. It doesn't work. You can't indefinitely keep that tension. And so the natural sort of settling back into the natural state is that of the open palm again. Yeah. So it's really about finding your open palm to all of life. And, I feel that we're talking about that very much in terms of the creative process here today. Like,
well, someone wrote something to me the other day which is quite interesting, which is sort of, I don't know if I'll find it necessarily, but it was, and it really struck me because it was such a beautiful insight. And it's something like, hold on, just this particular phrase. For me, awakening has been an unraveling of reactivity as it arises. And so there's this, if something arises in your experience and you meet it with resistance, that's kind of habit. That's a sort of an impression that's created a habitual sort of resistance and a tension in the system. And so being like naturally present, mindful, aware, awake to that, as these things arise and you feel a thing, then you can release them as you go.
Yeah, you can actually meet that resistance or that contraction with an openness, and then it sort of transcends that and includes it.
So you're meeting these clenched fists in your
with an open palm,
and then you open. But in the end, ultimately, you are an open palm.
You are. That's it. It's a description of the natural state. It's not a prescription of you need to open. Yes. It's a description of when all else is dropped or met. What you're left with is openness.
Yes, and then life becomes this sort of to a much greater degree, flowing, blissful, non-obstructed, non-resistant, deeply accepting, challenging often, but beautiful, a flow of being.
Yeah, and that's not something you need to achieve. It's something you are. It's a description
something you recognize, but
of what your true nature already is.
But it's like, I would say, there's this as a process of awakening, in some sense, the discovery of that open aspect of your own being as consciousness, awareness, wide open, fundamentally non-grasping, fundamentally non-resistant, just open, accepting everything, including everything. And that can be really, really profoundly grokked and abiding recognition. But then it can take time for the conditioned physiology, mind, body,
the habit
to release all these various places where it habitually has resisted and embodied those resistances. So, post-awakening, there can be a real, I wonder if that's going to be a plosive on the mic there, post-awakening. The mind-body catches up.
It does.
In a sense. That essential nature needs to penetrate and embody and integrate deeply and all, and so that's where this person was saying, it's releasing these tensions as they're met.
And I think especially the process becomes especially easier if there is understanding that is part of the process rather than there's so many people with come into sort of spiritual practices or spiritual awakening with ideas that is sort of a one and done kind of thing. Yeah. And actually, and this is why I like to speak so much of spiritual awakening versus embodiment of that spirit. So waking up to that nature, but then the embodiment of that is a process.
Yes.
And actually, I would argue an unending process in terms of the human lived experience of that.
I get where one could you say one and done, not, but in some sense it kind of is and it isn't. It's both.
It is. It's a new chapter. It's a new chapter.
But then because the process then becomes much less of a personal practice and more of an unraveling and undoing.
It's not I'm doing this. I need to do this.
Yeah.
It's a
although
it's a
maybe
happening.
It can show up.
But it's a deep movement of embodiment that's happening at that point.
Yeah, it can do it now.
Yeah,
in a natural way. Yeah. So all this is reflected in the creative process, which I love.
Yeah.
And to bring it back a little bit to that, which is, again, there's to faithfully, allow the creative process to flow through you without resisting it.
Yeah.
Without getting caught up, without imposing your own judgments upon it as it's happening, is to disrupt flow. Flow is a great gift to be in that, creatively in flow. Anyone who's spent any time in that particular condition knows it. Whether you're a musician or a writer or an artist or a sport or an athlete, it's complete self-forgetfulness. It's complete,
and can show up in any activity.
Yeah.
Traditionally seen as creative or not. Actually,
yeah.
I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking of like a physicist or a mathematician.
Absolutely.
I absolutely can imagine that there are moments of when they're completely lost in the equation, and they are lost in the equation. Like they, the person, are lost.
Exactly.
And it just becomes the process of the equation creating itself and unfolding within itself.
Well, this is what I've always maintained, is actually we're actually always in flow. It's only the thought that we're not that takes us. Life is flow, whether you're engaged in a particular let's say vigorous activity or not.
I agree.
It's always flow. It's flow.
It's a matter of noticing.
It's only we in fact, if anything, the notion of flow as a separate state is a sort of a limitation.
I agree.
It's the same as saying, I'm aware, but then I'm not aware. No, you're always aware. You just haven't noticed that you're always aware. When you notice you're always aware, awareness is always present, and that's that. So flow is the same. Flow is a quality of consciousness, and so just live in flow,
and notice where there is a
notice
belief
where you obstruct it,
where there is a belief that you are not in flow.
Yeah, exactly.
There's where
because this flow is naturally.
There's where your work is to see all of the limiting viewpoints that say not flow, this is not flow. This is I'm out of this.
Yeah, because of course the interestingly, the first stage of enlightenment from one of the Buddhist traditions is called stream entry, and which really points to that. Suddenly you recognize that life is a field of flowing wakefulness. That's it. You're in the stream of awakening, and it's always flowing. And so that points to this flow, because flow's lovely. I mean, it's just not unduly self-aware, just present to whatever's arising without restriction and resistance, energetically open. And I liked what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi used to say, that pure consciousness is bliss. It is the nature. Consciousness itself is the nature, is ananda, which is bliss. But when you're in bliss, just that that pure consciousness with no activity, no relative awareness. Let's say you're just in a sort of a samadhi. You're not really experiencing the bliss. It's only when activity kind of begins against and within the context of that you sort of, that you begin to experience the blissfulness of life. Get to that
There's
subtle
movement.
that movement of it.
Movement
You use the analogy of if you're in a nice lovely warm hot bath. If you're completely still in there, you don't really feel it in the way. You start to wriggle your toes though, and it starts to be, that's nice, and you start to experience it's actually the changing relative movement that actually gives rise to the blissfulness of experience.
The love of it, the love of experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't want to be lost in samadhi forever.
No, what's the joy of that?
Yeah, you just want to.
The denial of the relative is you're
missing
out on the real value and joy of the relative as well.
Because there's a trap, right?
There is a trap,
on the awakening, in the awakening path, that and I see why, because as one is approaching awakening, typically I would say you're engaged in some kind of spiritual practice, some meditation. Awareness itself as a state of consciousness, pure awareness as a state of consciousness is becoming more available to you, and
it's a relief from the suffering of the person,
of the relative, the person, and exactly. So that shows up maybe as meditation, by things like that, where you're sitting quietly. There's a gap. You've identified the gap. That becomes more available for as you're approaching it. But it's the binary thing. It's like you're either in your kind of field of the conditioned field, the relative field of which is often a state of suffering, which is why you're meditating in the first place for many. It's unsatisfactory, let's say, dukkha, and so you meditate and you find this quietness, this peace, this awareness, this non-conceptual being, and then you back out of that. So it's a binary. But there's your relief in the pure consciousness of empty, non-conceptual self. And so you can see how you imagine that your ultimate liberation would somehow be to stay there all the time.
Yeah.
And that's a trap, because it's not the one or the other. That's the viewpoint of the seeker. It's the two.
The union.
It's the union. It's the coexistence of these opposites. The consciousness, the empty, blissful, silent consciousness, and the dynamic activity of phenomena and mind. And but even then, you can that someone could get to that stage where the awareness nature is abiding, but then sort of subtly reject
the humanity of it all.
The humanity, the experiencing.
When actually there comes a point when you realize that the experiencing never detracts or takes away from your primordial ground.
Right.
And then, or because it doesn't detract away from it at all, it just becomes a temporary, joyful arising of something within that.
Yeah.
Something else.
Well,
different taste.
Yeah, right. The thought came the other day, it's a simple kind of, aphorism, realize the absolute and then enjoy the relative.
Yeah.
But, if the relative is...
Well, if you don't realize the absolute, you're constantly terrified of the relative coming and going. The
you're
instability.
Groundless in the relative, if that's all you know.
That's why you get a fear of wanting security and stability.
Yeah, right.
But if you recognize the ever stable, ever secure ground, absolute ground of it all, then you don't need the relative to provide that for you. You don't need the relative to provide the security and the security and the stability. And so then the relative is able to be its nature, which is changeable, and the absolute is able to be its nature. And actually, there's no fighting there.
No.
It's both and.
So I can see why, you can see why people cling so desperately to something in the
because
relative.
that's as sort of stable as they've found.
That's as stable, and even that, no matter how tightly they cling and how permanent they think it is, it's all passing. The answer is to discover your true nature, your deeper ground. Yeah.
Find your deeper ground. Then there is no need to keep that which is changeable.
Try to, anyway.
No.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. You can't keep it, but you do try to, yeah.
Well, that, it's interesting. We talk about this. This is, I'm always, reminded of the sort of fundamental Buddhist teachings on this, and, clinging and grasping being, the real, the proximal causes of suffering. But ultimately, we only cling to the relative, to something that's relative, because we haven't discovered.
It's a coping mechanism.
It's a coping mechanism, and it's imperfect, and it leaves you feeling very anxious and very tense.
It's a misunderstanding
and
of
very
life.
Fearful, but clinging and grasping is perfectly natural.
Yeah.
If that's all you got, but once you discover the groundless ground,
and it's not something you need to cling to. That's the thing, is there's no tension of I need to keep this.
No, the ever-present awareness
because
nature.
it's what you are. There's no effort to be that. You already are that. And
so
it's a noticing of that. It's a remembrance of that.
And so it's just knowing that, noticing that, recognizing that, realizing that, and all the grasping and that falls away. Because I don't need to grasp. I am.
And I can't grasp.
Grasp
this stuff can't be grasped anyway.
Space can't grasp anything. Yeah.
So there's the where the suffering is released out of the system, because the clarity of this that I'm grasping to is not to be grasped. Yeah. Then you're not suffering, because you're not going against the nature of what is.
Right. So, the teaching says, it's avidya, which is non-clarity. They call it, translated as ignorance, but it's sort of vidya's clarity and into true nature, and avidya is non-clarity. So, the actual problem isn't the clinging, but it's the non-clarity about the live.
Well, this is why I say
nature.
To people, I don't believe you have to get rid of conditioning or coping mechanisms. You just have to see that is what's happening.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so it's not a matter of getting rid of anything. It's a matter of seeing clearly, and things fall away when it's seen clearly.
Exactly.
And that seeing clearly it's not a passive thing. It's an embodied thing. It's an active seeing. It's a whole system seeing. It's not just a standing back and detaching from, which is what some people imagine it to be. It's a whole body lived grokking.
Yeah. You see people, it's really interesting. Some people, on the occasions I've seen people, sitting with someone and they recognize it, and often laughter is one thing.
The ridiculousness of that which you were not seeing before. Now being seen.
It's there. It's so obvious. It's so clear. There it is. And everything, they're relaxed. And, you see people physically change, they're
well, it's an energetic opening. That's what I mean. It's awakening.
And that has a physiological correlate.
Yeah, awakening, I think some people imagine it to be a very, you just need to change the thoughts, or, there just needs to be some insight on a conceptual level. But it's not just on a conceptual level.
Well, at least to a release on the...
It's an energetic. Awakening is it's a whole system awakening. It's very energetic. It's an opening.
Yeah.
It's a releasing. And that translates on the mind level in a certain way, and it translates in the body level on a certain way, and it translates. It looks differently in different aspects, but
you see it on the someone's face, you just the tension in the body and face, and then suddenly they'll spot something that you're pointing to, they'll recognize it. Oh,
Well,
and the
I
whole
remember-
face will release. They look different.
Yeah, well, I
They look
remember
like-
you had this tortured
Oh yeah,
look about
that's
you.
right. Yeah, it's true.
And I wasn't the only one who sort of said
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You look less tortured.
Yeah,
I remember a
that
friend of
tortured
ours.
look. Yeah, it did.
And it's that. It's like the tension in the body, in the system, the face, all of it is, and that can take time to unwind
It can
as
take a
well.
while. But often it can be quite pronounced and sudden, like
yeah,
release, and then they look like they're a different person.
Yeah,
Literally,
exactly.
the muscles in the face operate in a different way, and so it just releases the whole system. Just the introduction of true nature, of awareness nature, just
recognition
the
of that,
recognition
yeah.
that it, there's more, profoundly much more, that the relative, personal, manifest reality is
Mind, body.
held in a larger space of open awareness,
Yeah, and that is who
and that's
I am.
where you are,
And that's who I am.
you are,
Yeah,
and just releases
I
all
am
that.
not just this mind body.
Yeah.
I am that which
I am
is
that which
prior
knows,
to that.
that
yeah.
which, in which.
And yet I am also this mind body.
Yes,
I'm
my
just
body's
not
a modulation of my nature.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
an
just not
expression of my nature
only
as
that.
being.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how it plays out, though, as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap it up there for today. That was lovely, and really nice to sit down and, in our new abode on a sofa
Yeah.
or a lounge chair in your case, with the sun coming through the window. And it was really nice to sit and talk, and we'll do it again soon. And thanks for listening.
Yes.
Bye for now.